just wanted to give some background on the origins of this panel. We know that one of the most dangerous moments for our patient group is when they're in adrenal crisis or have low calcium and it's not dealt with right away. And we unfortunately are still struggling, many of our patients are struggling with getting emergency care immediately that actually responds to the situation, to get EMS workers, emergency physicians, endocrinologists, in fact, all kinds of medical personnel to listen to the patients and the families and say, we need hydrocortisone now, or we need IV calcium now. And so we constructed this panel of experts to address this issue, and we wanted to have it together as a full group so we don't have a separate session running at this time because we think it is so important to save people's lives with APS type 1 and also with other disorders that suffer from these same problems. So today we on this panel have Todd Talarico, who you've met. He is the president of the APS type 1 Foundation and a family member. To his left, we have Dr. Cheri. She's traveled from Montreal. She's from the University of Montreal. We have Dr. Richard Auchus, who's traveled to us from the University of Michigan. And then Dr. Olle, who's come to us from Sweden today. Thank you so much, and we're very grateful for the kilometers and miles that you have all traveled to get here.
All right, good morning, everyone. I think this will be a really interesting discussion. The one key learning that I've had so far working with these three outstanding individuals is I've learned a lot just being on the phone with them, and it's fun to listen to them actually debate certain things as we work through the process. So again, it's always about what, you know, the unknown, the experiences, but I think you'll learn a lot. This is not going to be a didactic session. We are going to go through a couple slides to really set the stage, and we're going to let Dr. Auchus open that component of it. I'll moderate some discussion. We'll open for some general Q&A, and I think everyone here in the group here has a number of comments that they'll make as we work through the slides. So you guys can back me up, push me forward as you see fit. So I live by this, and I think any of you who have been in the hospital know this. We have a tendency to be really nice, and then we get very direct, don't we? So I've had opportunities where, you know, in the emergency room, I've gotten very direct, or my wife has gotten very direct, and I think you'd really want me to be more direct, because when she gets direct, you better get out of the way. So let's kick it off with, you know, really what is a crisis, and then stress dosing. So I'm gonna turn this over to you, Dr. Auchus. Okay. Yep.
Okay. Good morning, everybody. So we just have a few slides, and we just want to use these as sort of talking points so that we can get into the discussion. So when I have my patients with any form of adrenal insufficiency, the first thing that we do is we go over sick day rules, just like you do with type 1 diabetes. And what I usually talk about is that when you can't defend your volume status. Now that's a nebulous concept, but it means the fluid that you have and the salt that keeps that fluid in your blood vessels, okay? So what are those things? High fever, because you're sweating too much, diarrhea, and vomiting, okay? So in general, a fever, if it's just a fever, that you can usually manage at home. As long as you're able to drink and you're not throwing up and you don't have diarrhea. So we just say double your dose until you're well for 1 day. So whatever your regimen is, take twice that. Next day I still have a fever, I still double my dose. The next day my fever comes down, I still double my dose for 1 more day to make sure that that doesn't go back in the other direction. And then if I don't have a fever the next day, then I go back to my usual dose. So that's pretty simple. Now, you know, and then the other situation is, again, you're losing fluid faster than you can replace it. So that usually means that either you're losing it too fast because you have vomiting or diarrhea, or you can't take your pills. So that's when you take your Solu-Cortef. Now, I want to emphasize that the Solu-Cortef does not keep you out of the ER. It gets you to the ER. Because you see, you're already volume depleted, okay? You've already lost that fluid, and you can't put it back. The only way you can get it back is with an IV, all right? So the Solu-Cortef will sort of slow things down and prevent it from getting worse, but you need the fluids, and that you have to get at the emergency room. So again, the Solu-Cortef gets you to the emergency room. It doesn't keep you out of the emergency room. And you take that when you can't get can't get your volume status. You can't defend your volume status. And it's the GI irritation that really is the first symptoms. And that's the thing that should really get you ready to take that when you have that stomach upset and that, which again, the APS1 people, because of the potential for getting candida in their esophagus, that is something that they get a lot. Okay. Now, people talk about stress. Mental stress, I'm having an exam, I broke up with my boyfriend. No, that doesn't qualify, sorry, because again, you may sweat a little more, but it's not like a high fever. You don't need to double your dose for that. And we have people that keep doubling their dose for any little thing, they're painting the hallway, and it irritates me. No, because that actually causes problems in the long term with overtreatment, all right? All right, now in the hospital, now this comes up a lot. The other point I wanted to make, and again, the three of us discussed this before, is that, when you get to the emergency room, all right, the point is you want a dose of hydrocortisone, you want a bolus, you don't want a continuous infusion. You want a bolus, you want it as quickly as possible, and at least a day's supply, all right? So whether they want to give 30 milligrams or 40 milligrams, I think you don't want to quibble about that with the doctors too much, because that can delay it, as long as it's at least a day's supply on the first dose. Some of us give 100, some of us give 50, some of us give 25. All of those are at least a day's supply. So as long as it's given rapidly and it's given by bolus, then you're okay. Now, then things will come up like, well, I'm having surgery, so what should they give me for a surgery? Well, it depends on the surgery. If you're having, skin tags removed, that's not a big stress. Because there's a few issues. One is, am I not going to be able to eat afterwards? Okay, how long am I going to be in surgery? What is the expected blood loss? So if someone's, doing a carpal tunnel release or taking a bunion off, something that you're going to be, it's going to take less than an hour, you're going to be eating right after the surgery, we usually sort of give double the dose, or even sometimes just the usual dose, just times 1. So again, make sure you get something right before the anesthesia, and oftentimes just double the dose, or about 25 milligrams of hydrocortisone, and then you go back to your usual dosing. Now, if it's a major surgery, if it's something where you're not going to be eating after the surgery, that's a different situation. Then you're going to need multiple doses. And to me, the frequency is more important than the amount. So I usually prefer to give a smaller dose every 6 hours than a larger dose every 8 hours, but I think there's a lot of variation in that. I think because more frequent doses prevent you from having troughs that are too low, but again, there's a range of appropriateness for this. And then sometimes you need a taper of that dose if it's a significant surgery. So again, if someone's having cardiac bypass surgery, well, that's a big deal, and they're going to lose a lot of blood. They're going to be not eating for a long period of time. So again, it should be addressed appropriately to the stress of the surgery. And your endocrinologist should be involved before the surgery. They should plan this out with the surgeon. They should communicate with the surgeon beforehand so everybody knows what's going to happen. And if it's at a different hospital, this is where I run into problems a lot. People that come from far away, they're having a surgery done. I'm not going to be there afterwards, but I can talk to the surgeon ahead of time and identify a person at that hospital who can take over if things don't go well. So those are a couple of other points. So, you know, the important treatment for adrenal insufficiency, hydrocortisone, fludrocortisone, and salt. We all agree that you know, the standard doses of hydrocortisone almost always work well, but what what a lot of endocrinologists don't take care of adrenal diseases don't pay attention to is the fludrocortisone. And I think people who have, you know, they just feel tired all the time, and the doctor keeps increasing the hydrocortisone and so on. It's actually the fludrocortisone that they're deficient in. And fludrocortisone, it's interesting because some people only need a half a pill a day and other people need 6 pills a day. And unless you measure standing blood pressure, plasma renin activity, and are in tune with this concept of volume status, you don't adjust that well. And I think where endocrinologists, at least on the adult side, fail more is in adjusting the fludrocortisone and then in the hydrocortisone. So that is an important component. As Dr. Campi was saying, that the risks of the stomach onset, that is, you know, the signal that something might be happening. You have to then be vigilant. If you're going out, you need to take your Solucortef with you. Those are the things. In traveling, for toxicity, you should, or for travelers' diarrhea, you should think about bringing prophylaxis for that. Ciprofloxacin is what is typically used for that if you're going to Mexico or India or somewhere like that, and activated charcoal for poisonings. Okay, so Cheri, you want to take
Yeah, I am just going to ask a question. I always like to know who my audience is. Could you please raise your hands if you currently have a family member under the age of 18 that is living with APS1? Okay. I'm a pediatric endocrinologist, and my esteemed colleagues are adult endocrinologists. And I make this distinction because I think we have different mindsets. Part of these different mindsets come from the fact that you can actually look at some of the data in the literature that shows you that something like 70% of acute adrenal crises occur in people under the age of 10 living with adrenal failure. That's a lot. And that when you look even further, about a third of a lifetime incidence of adrenal insufficiency, acute adrenal insufficiency episodes, will even occur in kids under the age of 4. Why is this? I think in part because children often can't communicate as well as adults in terms of how they're feeling, or perhaps the entourage, the people around them, are not able to pick up on the subtle indices that something is brewing. And the reason I put this slide in this talk is because I do want you to understand that physicians all over the world grapple with how to best handle acute adrenal crises. And we come up with guidelines, but they are only that. They are guidelines. And I wish I could reassure you that everything is written in black and white, and we know what to do, and we know what not to do. But that is often not the case. So, when we're talking about patients with an acute adrenal crisis, I concur with much of what has just been said. Also, you should know, however, that adult endocrinologists focus on a unique dose using a body surface area estimate of 1.7 meters squared for all their patients, which in pediatrics is crazy because we have little patients, medium-sized patients, larger patients. I mean, we have a whole range of body surface area. So we do our calculations based on meters squared, which is a surface area calculation. And so the guidelines will tell pediatric endocrinologists how to plan for an adrenal crisis with IV Solucortef based on these calculations. the guidelines are, again, very open with regards to how to deal with prevention of an acute adrenal crisis. And we agree as well that it has to be based on the severity of the illness. What is our problem in pediatrics? How many of you have had a kid that started out with a fever of 38 degrees? That would be 100.2 Fahrenheit if you think Fahrenheit, I think Celsius. And your doctor said, oh, that's a viral illness. And then a little bit later, your child got even sicker and went to 39 and 40 degrees. Did that happen to anybody here when their kids were little? It's very scary because we don't know as physicians whether those little viral illnesses are actually masking something that's going to be very serious, like a meningitis or a severe pneumonia. And so, if I could have the next slide. For kids, we tend to talk about doubling and tripling the dose. How many here have had the notion of tripling a dose vehicled to them? Please raise your hands. Okay, so Olle, that's how we do it in pediatrics. And I know you don't agree.
No, I don't agree.
Well, no.
You don't agree.
So,
but when we have a high fever, we tend to say, and a high fever for us would be over 39 degrees, and that, does anybody need Fahrenheit? That's 102.2. 102.2 is 39 degrees. So we say triple. All right, Olle, I'll give you your chance. And
well,
Richard.
so I just want to say, my mentor, who was a pediatric endocrinologist, used to say that children are not little adults, and adults are not big kids, although some of them behave like that. So there are significant differences in the physiology, and that's absolutely correct. You know, the newborn kidney is very resistant to the actions of aldosterone in retaining salt. That's well known. I mean, so there is a different physiology, and their volume is very easily compromised because they're smaller. So when she talks about special things for kids, you know, I totally agree with that. And, you know, so,
well.
We wanted you to hear this argument.
I think it's much better if you have a consistent, easy message. And that's why we in Europe say just double the dose, because there is absolutely no scientific evidence for this tripling. There is very, very little empirical evidence also. So this is a tradition that's based more or less on nothing. And the important part is actually to differentiate between the time you have fever, which, as you said, you can manage at home. I've never seen anyone with a severe condition that only has fever. On the other hand, a minor stomach upset can kill you. That's the big difference. So I think it doesn't help you to fine-tune these things, because we don't have any data to support it.
I'm going to just ask the parents in the audience. I learn a lot from my families. And one of the things my families have said to me is, as they get to know their children better, they're able to discern, okay, this is a triple dose. This is a triple dose. I'm worried. Versus, this is a double dose. I don't need to go any higher. Parents, do you feel you know your children enough to know when you need to double and triple? You don't. Okay. Does anyone feel more comfortable now that they've lived with adrenal failure in their families or personally to know when they need more? Okay. And this is, when I talk to my parents and I talk to the kids, I often get the feeling that they're living with the child. They know the child much better than any rule that a doctor can give about 2 times and 3 times. So yes, Olle, I agree. The message should be simple, but I think we have to listen to parents. And when the parents tell us 2 times was not enough, my kid, they're on the phone, my kid is not doing well, go with 3 times, triple the dose.
Or go to hospital.
Or go to the hospital. If your child, yes, they know when to go to a hospital.
Yeah.
But sometimes you can keep them away, and there's risks to coming to a hospital.
And Cheri, can I?
Yeah.
I think you bring up a good question as a parent. You know, the question a lot of times many of us deal with is when to go to the hospital. So you have a child with a fever, and maybe stomach upset or vomiting and diarrhea. You know, a lot of times, is it the first time? You know, do you feel? Yeah, we all kind of struggle. Where's the temperature? How to double? What's happening to the calcium, which we always also worry about at the same time. But many of us probably, it's like, when do you grab the car keys and go? And maybe you guys could elaborate on that a little bit.
Actually, before coming down here, I just sent an email off to several families who have kids with primary adrenal failure, not just APS1, but other types of primary adrenal failure. And that question, I asked them, what has been the most concern for you? That is exactly what they all came up with. When do we decide to go to the hospital? We did a retrospective review in our center to try to see whether or not we could have any idea of whether families were not getting the message to come soon enough, or whether they weren't doing the prescribed increasing stress dosing, and that is what brought them to the hospital. And basically, we learned a lot from doing this clinical. It was just an audit, just our best practice audit. What we learned is that there are some kids that will come multiple times, and some kids might just come once and never again. And I'm not just talking APS1 again, I'm talking about all the different causes of adrenal failure. And when we looked at normal control of the disease in these patients in between acute episodes, we couldn't really identify very much differences. So the message that I took away from that is there are some kids who are going to have to be a little bit more vigilantly watched, and you'll have to go to the hospital a bit sooner. And unfortunately, it's going to be experiential learning. So yes, in doubt, go to the hospital. When in doubt, go to the hospital. But then, if you find that you have gone once or twice and you've actually had to have your child put on an IV and given Solu-Cortef, the number of times that our patients were hospitalized was highly predictable. If they already had 2 hospitalizations under the age of 5, they were likely to have more. And it had nothing to do with how good the parents were. And I don't believe it had anything to do as to whether or not the child actually had a correct stress dosing prior to hospital admission.
May I?
Yes.
Yep. So what we've started in Sweden and Norway are cortisol schools for the patients and their relatives, both children and adult patients with adrenal insufficiency. And even though we don't have the scientific support for it, I would say that the general perception by all physicians is that the number of adrenal crises have gone down considerably after that. And one of the key points that we stress is that you should eat enough sodium chloride. So what they teach you in vet school is that you have 3 legs in treatment: hydrocortisone, fludrocortisone, and sodium chloride. And unfortunately, there are always some patients who listen to how dangerous sodium chloride is. You should avoid it. But if you have adrenal insufficiency, you will always lose a lot of sodium chloride in the urine, and then you have to replace it. So, and you have nothing wrong with your osmosensor or your salt sensor in the hypothalamus. So just listen to your taste buds and eat enough salt, and you would avoid a lot of adrenal crises, I would say.
Yeah, and that notion of making sure that not only you know how to give Solu-Cortef intramuscularly, but also that the grandparents have a nurse go to the daycare or go to the primary school nurse to make sure that everybody is comfortable injecting Solu-Cortef intramuscularly. And I think I agree with Olle. When we looked at our audit from 20 years ago versus more recently, we're seeing a drop in consultations for acute adrenal insufficiency as well. And I think it's
that's
the
a
IV,
life-threatening condition.
Yes, absolutely.
We have a question in the audience. Hi. Oh.
Doesn't work. On the bottom.
Need a-
Try. Is it on the bottom?
Is it up?
It's a placebo. Right.
How comfortable are you? I'll try to repeat it if you'd like. Oh, there you go.
Thank you. I just want to clarify two things. I'm hoping there's a hard and fast rule for one question. Where I live, it seems like it takes forever for the ambulance to get there. And one time I drove my daughter to the hospital, and I was sort of yelled at for taking that option and not waiting for the ambulance. I'm guessing there's no hard and fast rule for that, but do you have any thoughts on that? Of course, I stress dosed her. I have the Solucortef.
Where do you live?
I live in Oakland, New Jersey, and
And
about
are your ambulance technicians permitted to give Solucortef?
no, I have to give it myself, and then we have to wait for the ICU unit, which takes even longer because we're a volunteer ambulance. Eventually, I'm moving closer to the hospital, but until that happens.
Interesting enough, in the States, often we find that they'll actually mix it for you, which is very nice, and then they hand it back to you. So we've had an emergency situation with our daughter where they properly mixed the vials for it, but then she, or actually a roommate at the time, had to administer it because they could not administer it because they did not have ownership of the drug.
Can I? So you don't have a nurse in the ambulance in the U.S., is that the case?
No, no, the EMTs, so I'm on the CARES Foundation Medical Advisory Board. I know we're using some of their slides, and one of their campaigns is to get EMS to be able to administer. So they are literally not allowed. It's against the law for them to administer Solucortef. I know this is crazy. So but EMS is managed state by state. So the campaign is going state by state, and they've been able to get some states, in fact, I think New York is one of them, where they can administer the Solucortef, I think Maryland and a few others, but it's sort of a grassroots effort that you may want to join with them in doing. But so you, either way, you have to give the Solucortef. The ambulance can give IV fluids, which is one advantage of that. They can get, but I think a lot of times for kids, they have to do the osteo, they have to put it in the bone. So how far away is your hospital?
20 minutes on a good day.
Yeah, so that's, I think I drive them. Yeah.
But I must get a clarification. In Sweden, we have a nurse in every ambulance.
No.
Why don't you have that?
No. Good question.
And up in Canada.
For the same reason we don't have a subway that comes out here. That's why.
And up in Canada, with a universal health care program, which they don't have in the United States, as I understand, and are actually trying to get rid of what little coverage you have, we are now, province by province, it's a little bit less of an effort than in the States with so many states, 50 states down here versus just our 13 provinces, but we have actually managed so far in 3 provinces to get the EMS techs to be able to give Solucortef, and we're going to be going right across Canada. All the physicians are making appeals right to them. I don't know why it is. I think it's litigation. I think
Yeah,
it
I think
probably
that's
is
part
a
of it.
climate of litigation.
Yep.
I mean, actually, it's not impossible. It's just that no one's brought it up before, and I think that and then it's expense because you have to keep the Solucortef and it expires, and so they have to stock it and things like that. So there's a few things, but it's it has gone through in some states.
But do you know any conditions where Solucortef is contraindicated?
Well, no. I mean, I know it's crazy. I mean, they can give epinephrine, right? But they can't give Solucortef. So, and epinephrine has a lot more potential problems than Solucortef. It's historical. It's ignorance. People that so the guidelines and stuff. Do you think the emergency people read those guidelines? No, they don't read those guidelines. And so you get there, and and actually, I'm on so this month, right now, I'm on the consult service for the infant. That's why I got to race out of here, and you know, I rounded and I raced here, and then I got to race out of here and round again today. And they've already, it's like 8 hours before they call us, you know, and by then they've already given some hydrocortisone, whatever dose they decided, then they've, at whatever schedule they've decided, and say they don't even call us until, so I have the, you know, the parents of my adult patients that call me in Chicago when they're in the emergency room asking me, you know, what should I tell them to do? So, but the most important thing that you can do is have your medical alert identification on. Because if you don't have that on, you say, well, I have adrenal insufficiency, they're gonna say, you know, yeah, no, you don't, you know, and so have your medical alert identification on, have instructions from your doctor in your wallet about what to do, okay, signed, you know, with his legible or her legible name on it. That's the best you can do.
And before we go, yes. Yes. I was, we are thinking really nice.
Yeah, I think it's more important to answer the questions too.
Yeah, I was just going to say, well, let's do a little bit of both, because you do have some really good stuff in the back here that I want to make sure that may answer some of these questions.
I think there's someone in the back in a black sweater. I'm sorry, I can't see even your face.
All right.
Can you please explain to the audience what happens when you stress dose an APS person? The calcium drops, and then we have another problem?
And that,
well, that is what she has for
is basically
Here we are.
another issue I think that's really important. And we talked about it as a panel, and yes, we are going to address it. Would you like us to address it right now?
Yeah, well, I think it'd be a good idea.
Or it could be the volume expansion. So, why don't you go ahead? Oh, sorry, these are mine. Well, so actually, the point that I wanted to make is that still hydrocortisone first, okay? Yes, we have to deal with the calcium, but the hydrocortisone is first order of business because that will maintain the blood pressure. If you can, you know, again, usually people are throwing up. If you can, just suck on calcium tablets, but then you're really probably going to need IV calcium, and that's the next thing they need to give. And there is calcium chloride, calcium gluconate, at least in the US, that's what we do. We can give it as a not a bolus, but as a rapid infusion, and then we can give that continuously. That's okay to give continuously. And so I've given you a few examples here, but they, if someone has carpopedal spasm, in the ER, that they should then get a calcium infusion following that. But do the best you can. Go ahead, next slide. I think that's it that I have.
And there are also guidelines for the management of hypoparathyroidism. And again, what the doctors are taught and what was decided in these consensus guidelines based on the best evidence that's out there, and it's not always perfect evidence for sure, is that you want to normally maintain in a pre-acute illness situation, you want to maintain your serum calcium slightly below the normal, or at least in the very low normal range. That's something we teach everybody in order to minimize the chance of spilling a lot of calcium into the urine, as was discussed. And we do want to monitor that to make sure that we are aware of what's going on with regards to the kidneys. But in acute situations, I agree, in pediatrics or in adults, I mean, we would revert to calcium infusions if you cannot raise the calcium. And in little kids, it's a lot harder to work with just oral calcium in a situation of an acute adrenal crisis. It just doesn't work. So they have to be in the hospital. If their calcium is beginning to drop too low, you've got to get them in. I also had put a slide up for the management of hypopara, because whether we're talking about the Forteo or whether we're talking about NatPat, unfortunately, the monograms say not for use in kids under the age of 18. And that puts us as pediatric endocrinologists in a difficult difficult position. And even our guidelines will be very, very clear about that, and they say it's not recommended for those who were less than 18 years of age. I don't necessarily agree with this, and I know there are a lot of patients that are on Forteo as kids or on now, or beginning to think about going on the full-length recombinant human PTH. The only thing I would say is, I know that there is a voluntary patient registry for Forteo, and if you have a young person on this drug who is still growing, I think it's absolutely essential that somewhere there's registry data being collected so that we can eventually reassure everybody and make it a more widespread use. And the same, I was speaking to the important people in the company that make NatPat, and I really think it's important that they get a registry going as well. And I will take this further with the company myself, and I urge you to speak to your physicians to figure out how can you have long-term surveillance if you're going to be going on this new drug, relatively new, 2015. That's the only thing I wanted to say about hypopara.
So we have another. Let's take another question.
Well, but to follow up on what you said, you know, I've actually never seen that happen. I think that they're two separate processes. I really would not go in with the mindset that, oh, I don't want to give hydrocortisone because the calcium is going to drop.
Right.
It's more like I'm going to give the calcium of the hydrocortisone, and then I immediately need to assess the calcium anyway, you know, and deal with that separately. So I just want to make that clear. And I think possibly because you know, a lot of times they're given a big infusion of sodium chloride at that point, and that can potentially be the reason, not the hydrocortisone itself. So don't think that hydrocortisone is a nasty thing. It drops the calcium. It's more like their calcium's going to drop anyway because they're sick, they're hyperventilating, all those things, and I have to deal with it, but first get the hydrocortisone in.
I think there was another question somewhere closer.
There's a bunch. Oh, Robin, go ahead.
Hi. So I have a question going back to adrenal crisis and when to go to the hospital. You need to go to the hospital if you're losing fluids. So if you're vomiting, you have diarrhea, and you can't control it. What are your feelings about controlling the vomiting or diarrhea with anti-nausea pills? Because the one time we went to the hospital with vomiting and diarrhea, I begged and pleaded to get the Solucortef, finally got it, and then they sent me home with prescription anti-nausea pills.
Did you personally or your child?
My child.
Did they give saline until their standing blood pressure was normal?
I don't recall them actually taking her blood pressure.
I mean, because
but we did get saline.
The reason you're going to the reason you're going to the hospital is to get saline.
We did get the saline
until the standing blood pressure is normal. Do not let them go until the vomiting or the diarrhea is stopped, because you know if they're still having vomiting and diarrhea, it's just gonna, the hydrocortisone is not gonna stop that. And you know, once they get the fluid, it's just gonna come right back out. So they need to be admitted, you know, or put in the short stay unit or whatever. But it's okay to give those drugs, okay? You know, again, diarrhea is not gonna stop. Vomiting, well, did it stop or did it not stop? And you need to know if they can take their pills. If they can take their pills and they're not vomiting and their standing blood pressure is normal, yes, you can go home. But that's the issue. It's and so again, you know, people don't go into adrenal crisis because they have adrenal insufficiency. They go into adrenal crisis because they have an illness plus adrenal insufficiency. Okay, so then you give hydrocortisone to mitigate the adrenal insufficiency, but they still have the illness. They still need the hydrocortisone. If they can't take it orally, they need to be in the hospital.
Yes, may I add to that? So if you give antiemetics, you still will probably have a very rapid passage through the intestine. And once the hydrocortisone is in the colon, then it's no longer been taken up. So you should stay in the hospital.
I had a question for Dr. Deal. Yeah. For children with adrenal insufficiency, should they be given some sort of guideline for salt or a salt pill? And my second question is, when they do a lot of exercise on a hot summer day, like baseball tournament all day, should we increase like salt and hydrocortisone at that time as a stressor?
That was another question that one of my family sent in. Don't forget to talk to them about how much salt. What pediatric endocrinologists have tended to do with other causes of adrenal failure, which manifest even at birth, is to give salt supplement automatically up until the child is taking table food and can actually have access to a salt shaker, and you can salt the food as a parent. The age of adrenal failure onset in APS1 is a little bit older, and I really like the comment about taste buds, because I honestly believe that kids that need salt will gravitate to salty foods if you give them the salty foods, and they'll gravitate to that salt shaker once you sprinkle some on their food and they realize the taste of it. And they're not going to get high blood pressure. So I would say make sure you always have salt on your table and that your child feels comfortable using the salt. And yes, for my athletic patients with adrenal failure of all causes, primary adrenal failure, I always have them take salt tablets with them if they're in sporting camps. And I have some high-level athletes with adrenal failure, so yes.
So salt tablets don't have much salt in it, but canned soup, you know, that's what I like tell people. Bouillon, you got to know what your salt thing is, okay? If it's salt tablets, if you take enough, fine. If it's using the salt shaker, fine. But most of my patients will have like bouillon, the packages of bouillon, or the tablets or the powder. That's one thing. Sports drinks don't have that much salt, but they actually have glucose, so it's actually rapidly absorbed. The issue about stress dosing for athletic activities, there really is no evidence that that should be done. Having said that, when I was in Texas with Dr. Germack, that I had a patient with Addison's go into an adrenal crisis playing golf because it's 104 degrees in Texas, okay? And he was playing 36 holes, and he took, you know, he had his sports drinks and everything, but he still went into an adrenal crisis. So it's, I think it's a lot, not just the activity, but the weather that goes into play. Taking an extra 5 milligrams of hydrocortisone, again, even though there's no evidence for this, once or twice a summer is not going to hurt you, you know. But I think, again, you don't want to, like, every time that you're going to the gym, take an extra 5 milligrams of hydrocortisone, you know. So I think you have to, there is some art to this.
Yeah, we do have a lot of pickle eaters in this group, I think.
Yeah.
Just want to stress even further that salt tablets, in Europe they are 500 milligrams, and everyone thinks that's a lot. But the normal intake in Sweden, the average intake is 12 grams, thus 12,000 milligrams a day. And if you have adrenal insufficiency, you need more than that. So to take 1 or 2, it's much better with the salt shaker.
A pill an hour. I mean, what we usually say when they're having a day of sports is a pill an hour with a sport drink that they like, and that will usually see them through if they're, you know, going to be doing 3-4 hours of camp or whatever.
We have.
I have a mic.
Oh, go ahead.
I just wanted to say that going off of what she said, when I was in high school, I played lacrosse, and Dad, did we double the Fludro and the Cortef, or just the Cortef? We doubled one of them while I was playing. We doubled the Fludro.
We never doubled the Fludro.
No? Oh, okay. Other Cortef. But we did double it while I was playing, just because it was a high intense, it's a lot of sprinting.
Heated day.
And I would get very, like, just exhausted because it's always So while it was playing, and then we would go back right after lacrosse season to regular dosage.
Yeah, I don't actually counsel my adolescent patients to double their Cortef for their sporting activities. That I don't do. I concentrate a lot more on making sure that they have a good dose of fludrocortisone. And I think this is very important. I don't remember who it was that said that the requirements for any individual are highly variable. And so you can often see by going up a little bit on the dose, what does that do to your general sense of well-being. And sometimes this fatigue, as they said, is really because of the fludrocortisone and salt. So.
Yes, so anyone who's doing physical activity should have fluid and salt, but don't double the dose, because if you're doing it regularly, you will have far too much hydrocortisone. Yes.
And see the side effects. Yeah.
I guess we're starting running out of time, or maybe we can go to the emergency cards, or...
Yeah, let's flip through these quickly, these last couple slides, and I want to get to the emergency card.
I do want to say one thing, though. Keep going. We don't need to talk about this again. We said that. Yeah, we've said. Okay, stop here. I am a real nitpicker about having not only the emergency cards that you're going to see, which are fabulous, and I am so indebted to Olle for his work in the international community in getting these cards out in all these languages. And I think we need to give him a big hand. Go back. I'm keeping this up because I just want to tell parents, and please don't be angry with me, there is a new trend in tattooing. And I just want to tell you that all our medical associations are not coming out and either speaking against or speaking for tattooing. And I've had patients with type 1 diabetes who've just appeared in clinic with their tattoo. I mean, they didn't even consult us. I am going to say that if your child is considering a tattoo, we're at the stage where we're now trying to talk to physicians and emergency personnel and nurses and the emergency physicians in outlying clinics to always check forearms and shoulders for tattoos. I certainly would, if I had a child who said, Mom, I'm going to get a tattoo. I don't care what you say. I don't like these bracelets. They keep breaking. I lose them. I don't like them. I would say, okay, put it on your forearm and use the classic, don't try to be cute with little pictures and make it what it not is. Use the classic symbol that physicians and emergency people are used to seeing. And you can see on the right of that slide, there's three, there are three different tattoos, and so they're for adrenal failure. So it is going to happen. There's going to be more and more, and we as physicians have to know to look for them. That's all I wanted to say. Now your emergency cards.
Olle?
Yes.
You want this one up?
Right. So this started a couple of years ago in Sweden. Started in Sweden a couple of years ago when we started to assemble all the Swedish Addison patients and APS1 patients in a big biobank. Now we have a biobank with more than 900 Addison and APS1 patients, and they have a similar biobank in Norway. And we thought, could we do something for the patients who come and give blood and DNA? So we started with this card because every clinic had a different card, and they were sometimes contradictory. And then so it's one page in our language, Swedish, and one in English. And then Øystein came and said, is it okay if we can copy it? And we said, of course, that's good. And the Finnish did the same. And now the European Society of Endocrinology has adopted this card. And I'm bringing now 400 Spanish-English cards and 400 French-English cards that I can distribute here. And it would be great if Endocrine Society could endorse these cards. So it's nice if they look the same all over the world. So if you're thinking about a tattoo, make a tattoo like this, I think. The thing is that it's also important to keep confidence in these cards. At least in Sweden, we have quite a few people who like to pretend that they have adrenal insufficiency, and they really want the card. So in Sweden, and I think the same in Norway, it's only provided by physicians. We don't give it out to patient associations, for example. But I think we can be pretty sure in this here that we can give these cards to you without any problem. Yeah. Okay. So, well...
Oh, you want to go here?
Yeah.
Yep.
So Øystein knows more about this, but there will probably be a similar card about with this, perhaps only the color changed for hypoparathyroidism all over Europe.
Yeah.
We're doing now a survey in Sweden, Norway, and Germany. Patients want to have such a card.
Of course they will.
It makes sense.
We got now about 200 forms back, and I think overwhelmingly it was a yes. So, but it will be blue, not red. So blue for calcium. So.
Great.
So maybe soon we'll have a card.
We have another question? Gloria.
Basically, I know exactly if vomiting or diarrhea or fever, I take my son to the hospital. I'm clear with that. But you all repeated the minor stomach upset. In my case, in Pablo's case, that's his normal life. So, like a couple of weeks ago, I saw him. He didn't look well to me, and he was not feeling well. And I keep asking him, "What about your stomach?" Well, he's okay because that is normal. I measured his blood pressure. I was with him. I stayed with him all night, like every hour. I doubled his hydrocortisone dose, but I keep thinking that night that he was maybe having an adrenal crisis or beginning to have. We could stop it because we gave him oral, and I was with him, and he had salty food and everything. But how can we distinguish and urge a 22-year-old that maybe he's not feeling that well? Because it's that's their normal. The stomach upset is their normal life.
Well, but is he able to take his pills and eat? And if he is, then he's probably okay. But it's just that what we're saying is that when it first happens, that should get your ears up that you're now, you're now thinking about that possibility, and you make sure you have your Solu-Cortef if you're going out and so on. But it doesn't mean you have to go to the hospital. If you don't have a fever, your stomach is upset, but you're able to eat and drink, just be vigilant, but you don't have to go at that point.
Yeah. So does he have a malabsorption or?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think. Go ahead.
Well,
He was controlled, and it was like 5 minutes, and I was, should I take him to the hospital? He didn't look well to me.
It's difficult, of course, yes. But normally, if
he
you
was
have
not vomiting, he wasn't having fever, but he looked really, really out of him, and it was like
it's difficult even for a physician in those
and it's
circumstances. So it's
no, let's stay here, and it's like we stayed there, and we manage him, but it's a very harsh sense of responsibility for us.
Yeah. No, you're right. And then in adults, as they get other chronic diseases, then it becomes even more complicated. And some of them have actually type 2 diabetes, and then when they take their hydrocortisone, when they increase their hydrocortisone, it makes their blood sugars worse, right? So we have. It is a very tough situation, but I think the fundamental issue. It's actually good that you have a blood pressure cuff. I like that, and I actually think if you're good at taking blood pressures, following the standing blood pressure really helps a lot. And if they can't maintain their standing blood pressure, then you probably need to go in the emergency room.
You're a nurse, correct?
No, I'm not.
Oh, because I spoke to
I'm
one.
a mom.
I know you're a mom. I thought there was one mom who's a nurse. One of the things that I thought we should talk about, but we don't have enough time, although we could perhaps interact in a personal level if you'd like. I put in this slide about life transitions because we've thought as pediatric endocrinologists long and hard about how to help parents and how we as physicians can transition our patients to adult care. And I think this is one of the most gripping questions that parents deal with when they have a child with adrenal insufficiency or APS1 or any of these other conditions, which are serious conditions, be type 1 diabetes, whatever, is how can you as parents empower your children so that they can stand up for themselves, number one, so they're able to ask for help when they need it, so they know the little things that they can do. You can get these blood pressure cuffs, which are very easy to use, so that when they get to be in their early 20s, they are more and more confident and yet realistic about when they need help, because you're not always going to be there. And that's a terribly frightening thing for a parent to say to themselves. So we need to do everything to get those kids totally aware of what APS1 is, how do they deal with it, and when to go and get help.
Thank you.
Chris?
Hello.
Yep.
I don't actually have the adrenal problems, but I'm really glad to hear you're talking about the transition to adulthood, because that's been something big in my life. I'm 35. My mom's always been there. She just recently moved away, and I have no good concept of how to handle this disease as an adult, as a mom, wife, homeowner, working a job, and it's very difficult. And especially, I can't remember your name, but as a pediatrician, do you start at a certain age, maybe at 15, not only just talking to the parents, but talking and having the kids repeat some of this information to know it?
At my patients as of the time they're able to talk. I direct my comments to them. I make eye contact with my patients. I talk to my patients. And every visit, I make them tell me, why are they coming to see me? And we go over, and we go over, and we go over all the different pathologies, what the signs are, what the treatment is. It takes a lot of time, and that's why I am so grateful that I practice in Canada, because I can take more than 10 minutes to see my patients. I'm paid on an hourly basis. I'm not paid on fee for service. And so, yes, I have the time and I do it.
Well, you can ask Dr. Auchus. He's my endocrinologist. And I take more than 10 minutes. I make them listen. I'm like, all right, I've got a list. We're going to talk. But as a kid, I got diagnosed 26 years ago. They didn't know anything. They were sure it wasn't genetics, all of that. And I got talked over. I got ignored. What I said didn't matter because I was the kid. So that's really awesome that anyone make sure that they're talking to your kids, because it gets way harder when you have to be an adult and figure it out. It's hard enough having it.
Yeah. But parents often want to take control too. And so as a parent, you have to do everything you can to make the attention go to the child. Mm-hmm. You've got to. You have to. It's your role as a parent. You can have time for yourself to ask your questions, but you've got to make sure that the focus of that visit is on the child.
Yes. Thank you.
It brings up another thing, and that is if you don't have developed Addison's disease, I think patients like that should be followed with 21-hydroxylase autoantibody testing repeatedly.
And that's what I was going to ask.
At least yearly, because the positive 21-hydroxylase autoantibodies almost always appears a couple of years before the disease. Then both the doctor and the patient is alerted, and you might perhaps even start therapy even before you have a clinical.
Right. So that's actually one of the tricky things, is that we don't know what the natural history is of pre-adrenal insufficiency. You know, we may be able to learn that from this disease. In type 1 diabetes, you know, now we measure 21-hydroxylase antibodies in first-degree relatives. That's a very strong predictor of first-degree relatives developing diabetes, but it's very low. It's only a few percent.
You mean yeah.
Well, they measure that too, but actually 21, no, but 21 is actually a very strong predictor. And, you know, because if you have that on top of GAD, then it's a really strong predictor. But it's actually, of the people who have 21 hydroxylase only, it's very, but sorry, they develop diabetes, but it's a poor predictor of who develops adrenal insufficiency. But in APS1, it's the other way around. It's a strong predictor of who's, you see what I'm saying? Yeah. So, okay, 5 minutes. That's all I was saying. All right.
You know, I think one of the key things that we took away from this today is, you know, there's a lot of great things that are happening right now, and most importantly, as a parent or as an APS patient, you need to be prepared. You need to know yourself, have the necessary tools available to you all the time. Solu-Cortef, as mentioned, you know, you don't get a script for 1, you get a script for 5. And you ensure that you have them in the most appropriate places. People understand you, your friends are informed, and those are critical things so that when you are in a situation where this needs to occur, either you're handling it or your friends and family members understand it and can support it. So I just want to stress that as a critical component to this conversation. If we're not having those tough conversations with family members that look at your child and go, I don't see anything wrong with her, she looks fine. You know, and how many of us have had that conversation? They need to understand what can happen and how quickly something can happen. Is there any final comments you guys would like to make?
Well, so with the Solu-Cortef, if you grab the Solu-Cortef and it's expired, what do? You take it anyway. If you draw it up, you get a quarter of it out, and you drop the rest in the lake, what do? You give it, okay? So just give it. You know, it's like if I had a Nike sign, just give it, okay? Well,